My fiancée went out for a girls' night and accidentally but dialed me. For 15 agonizing minutes, I listened as she and her friends tore my proposal, my ring, and my entire character to shreds for another man. I didn't hang up. I didn't scream. I just sent a single text to a friend in the group. Put her on speakerphone for me. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I have ever heard. I used to believe that I was a good judge of character, that I could read the subtle tells in a person's eyes and know their heart. For 2 years, I had looked into the eyes of the woman I planned to spend the rest of my life with, and I had seen nothing but love, a shared future, and a comforting certainty that felt like coming home. 3 months ago, I knelt on one knee and asked that woman to be my wife, and through a veil of what I was convinced were tears of pure joy, she said yes. I was 29, and I thought my life was finally, perfectly falling into place. The engagement ring had been a significant financial undertaking, a purchase that represented 4 months of my salary, for months of careful saving, budgeting, and passing on small luxuries. But the moment I saw her face ignite with that brilliant, incandescent smile as I slipped it on her finger, every single penny felt like the best investment I had ever made. I was buying a lifetime of that smile, or so I had foolishly believed. Our life was comfortable, a rhythm of shared jokes, quiet evenings, and the easy intimacy of two people who had found their person. We were a team. I was a software engineer, she was in marketing, and together we had built a small, stable world that felt secure and full of promise. The foundations of that world, however, were built on sand, and the tide was about to come in with a devastating, unexpected force. The cataclysm began on an utterly unremarkable Friday night. She announced she was heading out for a girls' night with her usual circle of friends, a ritual that occurred a couple of times a month. It was a normal part of our routine, a healthy space for her to decompress and connect with her friends. I had no reason to suspect anything was amiss. I trusted her implicitly, with a totality that now seems criminally naive. I kissed her goodbye at the door, told her to have a wonderful time, and genuinely meant it. I settled onto the couch, looking forward to a quiet evening with my own company, a rare treat. The plan was simple. Finish the leftover pizza from the night before and binge-watch a new sci-fi series on Netflix. It was domestic, it was mundane, it was perfect. The house was quiet, filled only with the low hum of the refrigerator and the flickering light of the television. I was lost in a world of CGI spaceships and alien politics when, around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed on the coffee table, vibrating against the wood. Her name and picture filled the screen. An incoming call. A small smile touched my lips. I assumed she was calling to check in, perhaps a little tipsy, to tell me a funny story, or to say good night before her phone died. I answered with a cheerful, "Hey you, having fun," ready to listen to her recount the latest gossip from her friend group. But the voice that answered wasn't hers. It was a cacophony of noise, the indistinct roar of a crowded bar, clinking glasses, loud music, the overlapping chatter of dozens of conversations. Her voice was in there, but it was distant and muffled, as if the phone were buried at the bottom of her purse, a prisoner in a dungeon of leather and cosmetics. It was an obvious butt dial. I was about to hang up, to dismiss it as a simple accident, when the noise shifted. The phone must have moved, because suddenly, her voice cut through the background din with a chilling clarity. She was in the middle of a sentence, and the words she spoke were not meant for my ears. The words she spoke were a wrecking ball, and my entire world was the building in their path. I mean, it was just so pathetic, she was saying, her tone a mixture of disappointment and derision. My blood ran cold. My stomach plummeted, a sensation like falling from a great height. She was talking about my proposal. So incredibly typical of him, she continued, and I could hear the sneer in her voice as clearly as if she were standing right in front of me. She began to dissect the single most heartfelt moment of my life with the cold, precise cruelty of a surgeon. She recounted, for what was clearly an enthralled audience, how I had taken her back to the very restaurant where we'd had our first date. I had thought it was a gesture steeped in romance and nostalgia, a beautiful bookend to the first chapter of our story. To her, it was an unforgivable sin of the imagination. It wasn't romantic, it was lazy. It wasn't thoughtful, it was cheap. I sat frozen on my couch, the phone glued to my ear. My body was rigid, but my mind was a vortex of confusion and pain. Every instinct screamed at me to hang up, to sever the connection, to retreat into blissful ignorance. But a darker, more primal need took over, the need to know, the need to hear every last treacherous word. It was a form of self-flagellation, a morbid curiosity to see the full extent of the wreckage. I had to watch the car crash, even if I was the one trapped inside. Then, she moved on to the ring. The ring I had spent months researching, the ring that represented a tangible piece of my future and my commitment. And the ring, she said, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper, God, it's just embarrassingly small. A wave of nausea washed over me. I remember the look on her face when she saw it, the tears welling in her eyes, the way her hand trembled as I put it on her finger. It had all been an act, a performance for an audience of one. I had to fake my entire reaction, she confessed, followed by a ripple of laughter from her friends. I didn't want to completely crush his spirit in the middle of a crowded restaurant. He was so excited, like a sad little puppy dog. It was almost cute in a really tragic way. The laughter from her friends was the soundtrack to my world crumbling. These are women I knew, women who had smiled at me at barbecues, women for whom I had grilled burgers and mixed drinks, women I had welcomed into my home. And now, they were laughing at my expense, validating her cruelty, pouring gasoline on the fire of her betrayal. But the nightmare was far from over. The conversation took an even darker turn. She started talking about a man from her office, a man named Marcus. Apparently, this Marcus had been pursuing her for months, and she, my fiancée, had been seriously entertaining his advances. She painted him as the antithesis of me, a paragon of all the virtues I supposedly lacked. He was successful, confident, ambitious, and the word she lingered on with a wistful sigh, generous. She then delivered the final, devastating blow. She told her friends how Marcus had once, in a moment of supposed confidence, shown her pictures of an engagement ring he had been considering for a previous girlfriend. It made my ring, she said, her voice dripping with scorn, look like it came out of a gumball machine. With every word, the betrayal metastasized, spreading through my veins like a fast-acting poison. This wasn't just a drunken vent session. This wasn't just idle trash talking. This was a systematic demolition of our entire history. She was methodically assassinating my character, not to a stranger, but to her closest confidants. She portrayed our 2-year relationship not as a partnership, but as a burden, a charitable act she was performing out of pity. And her friends, my God, her friends were her cheerleaders. I could hear them egging her on, their voices a chorus of toxic validation. Why are you settling, girl? One of them slurred. You deserve so much better, chimed in another. Maybe you should explore your options with Marcus before you're officially tied down. Then, a voice I recognized with a sickening lurch. Her best friend, Sarah, the woman we had already asked to be her maid of honor, delivered the coup de grace. Honestly, Sarah said, her voice the loudest and most enthusiastic of the group, getting cold feet is totally normal. But maybe it's a sign. Maybe your gut is telling you something you need to listen to. 15 minutes. I listened to this for 15 solid minutes. 900 seconds of my life spent as an unwilling audience to the live autopsy of my relationship. 900 seconds of realizing that every I love you, every shared smile, every intimate moment we had shared over the past 3 months had been a lie, a carefully constructed performance from a woman who clearly viewed me with nothing but contempt. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the phone. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. But through the fog of pain and shock, a strange and terrible clarity began to emerge. I was not going to hang up. I was not going to scream into the phone and give her the satisfaction of a dramatic confrontation. I was going to let her dig her own grave, let her pour every last drop of poison she had stored up. But I would not be the only one to hear it. I would not bear witness to my own destruction alone. With my free hand, I reached for my laptop on the coffee table. My fingers, surprisingly steady now, flew across the keyboard. I opened up social media, my mind working with a cold, detached precision. I found her friend, Sarah, the maid of honor. Of all the women in that group, Sarah had always seemed the kindest, the one who would offer a sympathetic smile when the others were making jokes at my expense. If there was a sliver of a conscience in that viper's nest, it belonged to her. I typed out a short, simple message. 6 words that would detonate their entire evening. Put her on speakerphone for me. I hit send. The effect was immediate. It was glorious. In the middle of another of my fiancée's cruel sentences, the chatter on the other end of the line stopped abruptly. The silence was so sudden, so total, that it was like a physical blow. I heard a sharp, shocked intake of breath, Sarah's, I presumed. Then, a flurry of frantic, hushed whispers. I could picture the scene perfectly. Sarah's face, pale with horror, as she showed the phone to the others. The dawning comprehension, the slow-motion panic spreading across their faces as they realized the magnitude of their blunder. I heard my fiancée's voice, but it was a completely different instrument now. The confident, cruel tone was gone, replaced by a small, panicked tremor. She said my name, babe, not as a statement, but as a fragile, hopeful question, as if she was praying this was all a terrible misunderstanding. The cacophony of the bar seemed to fade into the background as, I imagined, they all huddled around the phone, a coven of witches staring into a cursed cauldron that was now boiling over on them. I remained silent. I let the silence stretch, letting them marinate in their panic. I listened to my fiancée's increasingly desperate attempts to fill the void, a string of stammered apologies and half-formed explanations. Her voice was shaking uncontrollably now, the voice of a cornered animal, not the confident predator she had been just moments before. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of their silent, shared horror, I spoke. My voice was calm, devoid of emotion. "I've heard everything I need to hear," I said. And then I hung up. My phone began to ring almost instantly, a frantic, insistent buzz. Her name flashed on the screen again and again. I ignored it. A flood of text messages followed, a desperate deluge of excuses and justification from both her and her friends. They were drunk. It didn't mean it. It was just a joke. I powered my phone off completely, severing the last connection to the life I had just lost. I sat there, in the silent darkness of the living room that was no longer ours, and I let the reality of the situation wash over me. The shock gave way to a pain so profound it was physical, a hollow ache in the center of my chest. But beneath the pain, something else was beginning to stir, a cold, hard resolve. I did not sleep. The long, dark hours of the night were not spent in grief, but in planning. By the time the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the blinds, I knew exactly what I needed to do. She didn't come home until around noon on Saturday. She looked like a ghost, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She stumbled through the door, launching into a rehearsed monologue of apologies and explanations. She was just venting, she claimed. Her friends had been a bad influence, filling her head with doubts. The alcohol had made her say things she didn't mean. I listened patiently, with the detached calm of someone whose heart had already been ripped out and stomped on. When her stream of excuses finally ran dry, I told her, my voice even and steady, that I believed she had meant every single word. I explained that for 15 minutes, I had been given a rare, unfiltered glimpse into her soul, and I had seen her true feelings about me, about our relationship, about her handsome and successful co-worker, Marcus. "Thank you," I said, and the sincerity in my voice seemed to startle her. "Thank you for being so brutally honest when you thought I wasn't listening. You've saved us both from making a catastrophic mistake." I told her the engagement was over. The tears started again, but this time they were laced with anger and indignation. She tried to argue, to bargain, to promise she would change. But there was no coming back from the truth I had heard. I told her she had until the end of the weekend to pack her things and find somewhere else to live. She left that afternoon, her final act a performance of righteous fury. She called me cruel, unforgiving, and accused me of violating her trust by eavesdropping on a private conversation. The irony was so thick I almost choked on it. She was angry at me, not for her betrayal, but for the fact that I had caught her. The 2 weeks that followed the implosion were a surreal mix of the predictable and the bizarre. As expected, she moved in with her sister and immediately launched a full-scale manipulation campaign to win me back. Her mother called, her voice a syrupy blend of concern and disapproval, pleading with me to forgive her daughter's pre-wedding jitters. Her friends, the same women who had been encouraging her to cheat, took to social media, sending me messages about how people say foolish things when they drink. It was a coordinated effort to gaslight me into believing that my reality was wrong and their narrative of a simple, drunken mistake was the truth. The most illuminating development, however, came from an unexpected source. Sarah, the maid of dishonor. A few days after the breakup, she reached out to me with a private message. She was deeply ashamed, she said, and apologized for her role in that toxic conversation. She admitted that she had felt uncomfortable with the direction things were going, but had been too weak to speak up. Then she opened the floodgates. She confessed that my ex-fiancé had been bad-mouthing our relationship for months. The girls' night crew had been a dump him committee since Christmas, actively encouraging her to trade up. They had fed her a steady diet of poison, convincing her that she was too good for a man in my profession, that she deserved a life of luxury that I could never provide. Sarah also confirmed my worst fears about Marcus. The lunch meetings had been thinly veiled dates. While nothing physical had happened, as far as Sarah knew, the emotional affair had been in full swing for months. Marcus had been dangling the promise of a glamorous lifestyle, and my ex had been eagerly taking the bait. The most gratifying part of Sarah's confession was her description of the immediate aftermath of my text. The moment my calm, disembodied voice had entered their conversation, the coven had scattered. The other women, suddenly remembering early morning appointments, had fled the bar, leaving my ex alone, drunk, and publicly humiliated, frantically trying to call me. Sarah said she had never witnessed someone sober up with such terrifying speed. In a delicious twist of fate, word of the drama had apparently made its way back to Marcus. A quick, morbidly curious glance at my ex's social media showed a sudden and conspicuous absence of any mention of him. It seemed that being publicly outed as the other man in a messy, dramatic breakup didn't align with the sophisticated, successful image he was trying to cultivate at their office. He had, it appeared, lost interest in any further lunch meetings. I took the ring back to the jeweler. They gave me about 60% of its original value. The financial loss stung, but it felt like a small price to pay for the most expensive and valuable lesson of my life. I used a portion of that money to book a solo weekend trip to a quiet beach town, something I had never done during our relationship, because she had always deemed any expense that wasn't directly related to her as a waste. The feeling of sitting on that beach, alone, with a book in my hand, with no one to criticize my choice of novel or complain about being bored, was a form of liberation so profound it was worth every dollar I had lost. A month after the breakup, the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, revealing the full picture of the disaster I had narrowly escaped. My ex made one last, desperate attempt at a reconciliation. She appeared at my apartment unannounced, her face a carefully constructed mask of remorse. She had made a terrible mistake, she claimed. She had ended things with Marcus, who, she said with a hint of bitterness, had lost interest the moment she became associated with drama. She tried a new tactic, acknowledging the hurt her words had caused but framing it as a singular moment of weakness, an aberration fueled by alcohol and her toxic friends. I listened to her performance, but the words were hollow, meaningless. I had already seen the truth behind the curtain. The woman I had loved was a character, and the actress was no longer someone I recognized or trusted. I told her I appreciated her apology, but the book on our relationship was permanently closed. Her mask of contrition slipped, revealing the familiar face of anger and entitlement. The tears turned to accusations. I was inadequate. I was unforgiving. I was throwing away the best thing that had ever happened to me over one stupid conversation. In her final, desperate attempt to win me back, she perfectly illustrated why I had to let her go. Her apology was just another form of manipulation, a tool to be used to get what she wanted. It was then I realized I felt nothing for her anymore, only a distant, clinical pity. She was doomed to a life of perpetual dissatisfaction, forever chasing an illusion of a better life, never capable of appreciating the good she had in front of her. The most surreal and validating chapter of this entire saga came last week. I was grabbing coffee when a man approached my table. It was Marcus. He apologized for his role in the whole affair, explaining that my ex had painted a picture of a relationship that was already over, that she was planning to leave me regardless. But the most interesting part was what happened after our breakup. She had, in his words, become unhinged, bombarding him with calls, showing up at his office, and trying to leverage mutual friends to get to him. He had seen her true colors, he said, and had realized he had dodged a massive bullet. He was now with someone new, someone stable and honest. He actually thanked me for inadvertently saving him from her. To hear it from him, the very man she had idolized as my superior, that I was the lucky one, it was a moment of profound cosmic closure. The final nail in the coffin came via a text from Sarah. My ex had a new boyfriend, a man she'd met on a dating app. He was wealthy, flashy, and, according to Sarah, treated relationships like business transactions. She gets the designer gifts and expensive dinner she craved, and he gets a beautiful woman on his arm. Sarah said my ex seems truly happy. And in a strange way, so am I. She found the superficial, transactional relationship she was always looking for. and she is no longer my problem. I've started dating again, too. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm meeting women who are interested in me, not in my potential to provide a certain lifestyle. That accidental phone call was the most painful 15 minutes of my life. It hurt with an intensity one didn't know was possible, but it also set me free. It saved me from a lifetime of quiet resentment and inevitable heartbreak with a woman who was incapable of genuine love. It was a brutal, ugly, and ultimately beautiful gift of truth.